Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In this video today we will talk about the board and the pieces. So as you can see, the checkered board is an 8x8 board. It has 64 squares, 32 black, 32 white. It's annotated with letters from A to H horizontally, and vertically is annotated with the numbers from 1 to 8. Before we set up the board and before we start playing any games, we have to make sure that this square, the H1, your bottom right square, is always white. We use this as form of agreement, so if you have to review a game, you don't have to worry on how the board was placed. You just simply put the board in a way that the H1 square or your bottom right square is white. Now, sometimes the board might be annotated in the wrong way. What you have to do is just simply ignore the numbers, ignore the annotations, and just put it in a way that this square, your bottom right square, is white. So anyway, let's now see the pieces and their position on the board. First in the list we have the pawns. Each player has 8 pawns. For the white, they are positioned on the second row, and for the black they are positioned on the seventh row. Then we have the rooks. Each player has 2 rooks. Then we have the knights. Each player has 2 knights. 2 bishops, yeah. 1 queen and 1 king. What happened? Now this is the starting position. From here, it's always the white who makes the first move. Anyway, sometimes players confuse the position of the queen and the king. So sometimes instead of putting them in this order, they put them in this order, which is wrong. In order to know to which square the queen goes and to which square the king goes, I'm gonna give you an advice. If you are playing with the white pieces, then the queen will go on the white square next to a bishop. So here, the only available position, the only available white square next to a bishop is this one. And then the king will follow. Again, if you are playing with the black pieces, the queen will go to the black square next to a bishop. Here, that's the only available black square next to a bishop. And the king will follow. So before I said that if the board is annotated wrongly, in a wrong way, you have to put the board in a way that the H1 square, your bottom right square, is white. But if the board is correctly annotated, then what you have to remember is that the queens will go on the D column, on the D file. So as you can see, it's A, B, C, D. The D column is always for the queen, and then the king will follow along with the other pieces. So now let's analyze each piece individually. Starting with the pawn, as I said, each player has 8 of those on the second and the third row. The pawns move only and only forward, they never move back in a game, but now I can make it go back only for demonstration purposes. But what you have to remember is that the pawns move only forward. So now that we know how the pawns move, let's see how they capture other pieces. In this position, if it's white's turn, and this, then basically all the white pawns can capture all the black pawns, and vice versa. Now, since each player has one move at a time, this pawn, let's take this pawn for example, this pawn can capture this pawn and this pawn. So we choose, and let's say we capture this. This pawn can capture either this or this pawn. Let's say we choose this. This pawn can capture this or this. Let's say this. This can capture this only. Can capture only this. Wait, only this, because this square is held by black pawn, so you can't capture your own pieces. So we capture this. It's white's turn, the white capture this pawn, black's turn, black capture this pawn, white's turn, white captures this pawn. Now I'm gonna delete most of the pawns and say, so here this pawn and this pawn are both blocked by the pawn in front of them. So this pawn is blocked by this pawn and this pawn is blocked by this pawn. In order for those two pawns to move, this has to move and this has to move. For this to be able to play there and this to go here. So that's how the pawns move and capture. The first move of any pawn, no, I made a mistake, wait. Okay, like this. The first move of any pawn can be either 2 squares forward or 1 square forward. Either way, after the first move of any pawn is made, then the pawns can move only by a square forward. So it doesn't matter if I played it, if I moved the pawn by 2 squares or by 1. The next move will be only 1 square forward. So let's say it again. The first move of any pawn can be either 2 or 1 square forward. And since they can't go back, the pawns don't move back, they will only be able to move by a square forward. Forward and only forward, never back. So, you have to remember, if the first move of the pawn is made, then the following moves of the pawns of those the first move is made, the following move will be by 1 square forward, and not 2. The only time a pawn can move 2 squares is by its first move. So if you move a pawn by 1 square on its first move, then you lose the chance to play it by 2 squares forward. So to recap, the pawn moves forward and captures diagonal. Anyway, now let's move to the next piece, the rook. The rook, as you can see, is positioned, the rooks are positioned at the corners. The rooks, no, let's just leave one rook. The rook moves in a cross-like pattern, like this. It moves both forwards and backwards, left and right. and it has no limitation on the amount of squares it can move. The only limitation is that if there is a piece in front of it, basically if there is a piece standing in its way to the square it wants to go, and it means that this rook, if previously was able to move until here, until the H column, now it's only able to move until here. The same way is here. It can't move past the knight or past the pawn or past the bishop. So these are the only available moves it has. If we remove the bishop and the knight, then those limitations are gone. And if we will move the pawn also, then all the limitations are gone. So that's how it moves. Now the way it captures is exactly the same it moves. So if we have black pieces here, then this means that this rook can capture here, can capture here, can go here, and then capture the bishop. That's how the rook moves. And if it's the black's turn now, this rook can capture this rook. Pretty easy. Let's see the knights. That's their position. Again, each player has 2. So let's leave only 1. The knight moves in an L-shaped pattern, like this. It is 2 squares forward, nope, 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 yeah. 2 squares forward and 1 on the right and 1 on the left. So basically, as you can see, it has 8 possible squares from one position. And as you notice, from a black square, the knight only lands on white squares. The way the knight captures is the same, it moves. Now the limitation of the knight is that if at the place or if at the square it wants to go there is another piece, yeah, if at the place it wants to go there is another piece, then this means that this square and this square, for example, are both forbidden squares, because the knight can't capture its own piece. You can't capture your own piece. Anyway, that's how it moves, and that's how it captures. The knight doesn't care if there is a piece standing in its way. The knight only cares if there is a piece at the place, at the square it wants to go. So here, it can go on both squares, here and here, the same way here. It doesn't care because it jumps from, it can jump, it's a horse, if you will. Anyway, now let's see the bishops. Let's remove this. So again, 2 bishops for any player. one on the black square and one on the white square. Let's leave only one. The bishop moves in a cross-like pattern, like this. It captures the same way it moves, and the limitations that apply to the rook, for example, that if there is a pawn in each way, or I don't know, a knight in each way, then, much like the rook, it can move like this. These are the two possible squares left due to the knight being here and due to the pawn being here. And that's how it captures. You just take it on the same diagonal, always, and just take the bishop and capture another piece. Now let's move on to the most powerful piece on the board. That's the queen. Now the queen moves like the rook and like the bishop combined. This means it can move sorry, this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, and this way. So the limitations that applied to the rook and to the bishop apply again to the queen, and it captures the same way it moves. So for example, let's put a rook here, a bishop here, another queen, I don't know, here, and the knight here. For the queen to capture these pieces, it will be simple. You first move it to the queen, then move it to the bishop, to the square for the bishop, then you move it here, then you capture the rook, and then you capture the knight. And that's how the queen moves and captures. Now, the king. The king moves exactly like the queen, but the only difference is that it moves only a square forward. Only one square at a time. And that's the same way it captures. I hope it's easy to understand that. If there is a pawn here, then this king can capture it like this. If I have a bishop here or here, then I can capture it. If I have a queen here, then I can capture it from here to here, not what I did there. If I have a knight here, then I can capture it. Anyway, so to recap, let's put it to a starting position. So again, the pawns move only forward. Flip it, the pawns move only forward and capture diagonally. The rook moves and captures the same way it moves, and the rook captures the same way it moves. It moves in a cross-like pattern, like this. The knight moves in an L-shaped pattern. The bishop moves in a cross, in an X-like pattern, and the queen is the bishop and the rook combined, and the king is like the queen, but only one step at a time. So my advice for the beginners with the queen is to be cautious, because it's the most powerful piece on the board and you can do lots of things with the queen. I would advise you for the starting, for at least 5 moves. If you are a beginner, for at least, I don't know, try as much as you can to not move your queen in unnecessary and make unnecessary moves with your queen. Because if you make unnecessary moves with your queen and lots of unnecessary moves with your queen, your opponent will trap her and capture her. So what you do with the queen is you just use it in a situation that you absolutely have to use her. And you have to make sure that on the place you are taking the queen, on the square you are moving it, it is protected by another piece. For example, here, because the knight captures, moves like this, then this means that if this queen was here and this queen captured your queen, then this knight would be able to capture this queen. So you just exchange queens. So anyway, protect your queen and take care of her. And this extends, in a extends to beyond the game of chance, extends to the real life. For the guys listening, guys, take care of your queen. Anyway, with that being said, now I have to show you the values of the pieces. Right here. The pawn is worth 1 point, or just 1 pawn is 1 pawn. The knight is worth 3 points. No, the knight and the bishop are both worth 3 points or 3 pawns. I prefer the pawns. The rook is worth 5 pawns. The queen is worth 9 pawns. And the king is simply worth the game. Because as I said on my earlier video, that will appear right, I don't know, here somewhere, in a couple of minutes. As I said, you have to trap the king, the opponent's king, in a way that he can't escape from a threat, more commonly known as checkmate. So that's why the king is worth the game. Anyway, try as much as you can not to exchange high value pieces for low value pieces. For example, don't exchange a queen for a rook. So don't give your queen to gain a rook. Give your rook to gain a queen. Don't give your queen to gain a bishop or a knight. Give your bishop or a knight to gain a queen. And vice versa, don't give your rook for a bishop or for a knight. Give your bishop or a knight for a rook. Otherwise, your opponent will will be up like 2 pieces, 2 pawns, 2 points, and it's gonna get difficult for you to defend against the checkmate. Anyway, with that being said, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you all on the next video. Goodbye.